I am joined, as you'd expect, by Josh Excels. Hello, Josh.
Hi, Ben. Yeah, it's good to be here. These are the kind of gameplay episodes I enjoy, which I'm sure you'll get into in a minute.
Yeah, we are going to be doing one of our sort of coaching episodes, and I'll introduce the, what do you call them, coachee, disciple? I don't know. In just
disciple.
a second.
I like the idea that there are disciples, yes.
And I'll introduce our other guest on this podcast, very familiar, of course. It is 𝘵𝗱𝗀𝗀, FC Pro commentator, of course. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I got the call up. Going to be looking at some gameplay. We need a Neil Warnock-esque inspiration, and I'm here.
Indeed. And we also have with us, as you'd expect, the person who is going to be receiving some coaching on this podcast, and that is 𝘵𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. Hello, Cherry. Welcome back to the pod.
I feel like this is payback for calling Richard Buckley a menace in Discord.
We have had you on before. It was about 6 months ago, actually, before the start of the game, because, and actually maybe you can remind people, you're relatively new, I guess, to Ultimate Team, I suppose, or at least to sort of taking Ultimate Team seriously. And so I guess it makes this more interesting. The previous two guests we've done this with have been playing for a really long time.
𝘵𝗱𝗀𝗀𝗀 was the first time I've actually spent an entire full cycle basically focused on the game. Beforehand, I would always get it, they would always release it for free, either via Game Pass or, it would be on sale around, Christmas or just after Christmas, where it'd be like $20. I would pick it up every once in a while. I would play for a couple weeks and then realize I have no idea what I'm doing. And I would stop. And then, but yeah, last year, thanks to Josh's editing and the 𝗵𝘀𝗀's videos, just for some reason getting suggested to me constantly, I took the plunge. I went an entire cycle. Went from basically not qualifying for champs the first 4 months probably to, I think eventually I was pretty consistently getting 9 wins last year, so I wasn't getting into positive ratio, but I got to maybe where the average long-time player probably exists, so just above maybe casual level, you could say.
And then I guess we haven't spoken to you, as I said, since FC25 came out. How have you found this game? Or I guess the kind of two different games we've had, considering the gameplay patch.
Even when before the, I guess, defending nerf or whatever people wanted to call it, I couldn't defend. So really, if anything, I've just started scoring more goals since the change with the patch. But basically, usually by the end of the season, I get to the end, like the upper end of Division 3, except for maybe the first season. The first season, maybe I didn't get past Division 4, but I'm basically in Division 3. I think the gameplay I posted was all from Division 4, but we're just from the reset. And I kind of took a week off after Team of the Year, and I wish I wouldn't have, because I would have realized I was going to miss one of the playstyle pluses on the evolution. So whoops me. But I generally I get between 6 and 8 wins. Generally, at one point, I was as low as there was probably a week or two where I only got 4 wins. But the last 2 champs I've played, I think I've been able to get up to 8 wins.
And obviously, you're starting to see that bit of progression. You said from 5 to sort of now you're averaging 8 wins. What's the aim out of the experience of playing the game? Are you wanting to just win every time? Are you wanting to enjoy the game? And if you lose, you lose. Like what are you trying to get out of FC?
That's a very loaded question, because that part of the reason why I did take that kind of week break is, with Team of the Year, I started finding myself getting more and more frustrated. I think I even posted in Discord, I was like, man, after every game, I'm like wanting to fire up and message somebody because I'm just getting so frustrated. So, and I think part of that is just my frustration with, I feel like I have been a bit stagnant and not get better. So obviously, I do want to get better, but at the same time, it's kind of tough for me to really play this like super casually. I kind of feel like that's what like clubs is for me. I like playing clubs. It's probably the most fun I have with the game. But with the Mexican League not being in the game, a lot of the players I know, the players I would want to follow, the players I'd want to evo, they're not necessarily in the game. I follow the Premier League and the other leagues kind of I like making fun of Arsenal fans as much as anybody. So, I do that, but I definitely have a competitive streak. I definitely want to get better. I think if I could ever get to like 10 wins, I think I would feel very, very accomplished. But honestly, man, once I hit 8 wins and I actually got that positive ratio for the first time, I mean, I was over the moon. And the fact I've been able to do it, I think 3 or 4 times. This cycle is actually, I feel great so far about the progression, and so it'd be nice to kind of continue that.
And would you say it has got harder or easier post-patch for you in terms of record?
I would say easier, but I think part of that is defending's never been my strength, even with playing the 4-2-3-1 like everyone was, and only controlling DMs. I mean, I still feel like I was getting dribbled through and things like that. So that was never really a strength of mine. So the fact that they made something that I felt other people had a better grip on that I didn't, it leveled the playing field a little bit for me. Obviously, they didn't nerf finesses, and I'm not really sure if it came up on the gameplay much that I posted, but I probably score 85% of my goals as finesse shots, and maybe half of them from outside the box. So I definitely that's what I'm constantly looking for is that finesse. And in my tactic, I have Son on the left hand side and I have 𝘃𝘀𝘀 on the right hand side. So I'm really looking at those inside forwards to kind of make those cuts inside and shoot those finesse shots. So that part hasn't really changed for me. So yeah, I've definitely found the game a bit easier. I will say that I still struggle with the and I had a game last night where I get up early 3-0, 4-0 and end up just still losing. So I definitely know that defending is something I need to work on. Player switching, it's sometimes for me I just feel like I'm just like in a constant panic and trying to switch players and stuff. And that's definitely the biggest thing I think I need to improve on.
I think it's worth pointing out as well, though, is that for somebody at your level, you're using precision shooting. And I was wondering, like, how do you feel like you get a lot of advantage from using it, especially considering you're hitting kind of finesse shots from distance? Because that's usually one of the complaints with precision is that it's more difficult to hit the kind of broken travellas or finesses from long range. Do you find that at all, or is it something you've just got used to?
It's actually funny you mentioned that, because over kind of the holiday break, I was playing a lot more, and I was trying to get I think I was trying to get into Division 2, and I was basically two wins in a row away from getting to Division 2. And so I was really pushing for it and talking with the guys in clubs, talking with and everyone's like, look, precision shooting, you don't need to use it. Don't even bother with precision shooting. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to switch to assisted shooting. And so I was switching back and forth, doing exactly what you're not supposed to do. Game by game, I would switch between the two to see if I could tell a difference. At some point, I was missing the net in true 𝗔𝗍𝗰𝘀 fashion, and I was just like so frustrated. And I'm like, all right, I got to turn precision shooting off. Like, this is ridiculous. And I go and I look, and I was actually on assisted shooting. So I kind of realized that while there is a difference with assisted shooting, and I mean I was missing the net just as much. I didn't feel a huge difference between the two. And this is, like I said, this is coming from somebody who doesn't have that muscle memory built up from years and years and years of playing with assisted. So it could just totally be the fact that, I at this point, I've used precision shooting more than I've used assisted shooting, and that's just what I'm used to. But, I kind of think a lot with the new things in the game, like advanced defending last year. I started with it from day one because that was the default, and that's just what I was used to. So it'd be tough for me to kind of go away from advanced defending to tactical defending, just because to me, I've only used advanced defending. So
it's interesting you say that, just because it's one of my notes is that I actually feel like it hinders you more than it helps you, advanced defending. there's quite a lot of times you go for a seal out, but just end up kind of placing yourself behind an attacker.
Yeah, that's the reason I stopped using it, to be honest. I think it's not as consistent as it once was in terms of making sure you A, win the ball, but B, don't just walk across the player almost, which can be quite frustrating. It's probably time to get into the analysis itself. And for those who haven't heard one of these episodes before, there will be a link in the description to some raw gameplay footage, which 𝘬𝘃𝗧 here has recorded. And one thing to say is that it is timestamped, so you can see the different games there. Thanks to 𝘬𝘃 for doing that. But you shouldn't need to watch that video to sort of take in the advice that we're giving to 𝘬𝘃 on the podcast. Also, in the future, we may actually, have video in the YouTube video, if that makes sense, of the gameplay as we're talking about it, which I guess would help quite a lot. If that's something you'd like to see, would benefit from, then, do drop a comment saying so in the comments, because it will take a significant amount of extra time to do that, but it'd be good to know if that is something people would like. Right, let's get into it, and we will start then with you, Richard. Maybe just some initial things you saw that you wanted to focus on that might be useful for 𝘬𝘃 to know off the bat.
I think there were a couple. You second man press a lot. I think just don't do it for a little while. When I was watching, you're holding R1 with certain players, but because you're, as you said yourself, your player switching isn't as good as you want it to be with the right stick. The second man press is almost overlapping and you're pulling players out of position. I think on the first goal that you conceded, where he played that sort of short free kick down the line, you were second man pressing, and I think it just wasn't quick enough. I personally, I don't second man press. I just press all manually with my own players, and I think just try it for a little while. Just don't take your finger off R1 and just see if you can get into a better shape without the AI coming over and pressing the ball for you. And I also think with the defending, when I did look at your team, your midfield is very attacking. You don't have a midfielder in there with intercept plus, anticipate plus, sort of. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗰𝘀𝘁 was the 6. To me, is if you're going to play a 1, it has to be a very defensive, central defensive midfielder, someone like a Declan Rice or the centre back Evo, for example. If you can get anticipate plus in that position, I think you're quite easy to play through. I think if you had a more defensive player in that role, maybe just take Rolfo out, put 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗃𝗀 into that right centre mid position, and then bring in a more defensive player in there, I think it would help you in that area of the pitch.
Yeah, I think they're all good points. Let's focus more specifically on one area for now, and let's go defending. That's certainly something people always want advice on, and I think you mentioned the second man press, but also actually, Josh, certainly I think player switching is something that needs to be brought up here.
It's something that I kind of came up with in the first 15 minutes of the first game, and it's a game that you win, and I could concentrate on the game that you lost at the end, but I actually think it's important to know that in games that you win, there are still things that you can improve on, because it ends up being one of the reasons you lose the final game, and that is the ability to switch back a little bit quicker. You tend to try and put pressure on people really, really quickly, and it causes you to be behind them. They're between you and your goal, and you are trying to sprint back. It's very difficult to win the ball sprinting back in the post-patch era. And so switching into a midfielder earlier or switching into a defender earlier will allow you to put more pressure on the player, slow the player down, and then if you can slow their momentum, allow you to immediately then switch and bring a midfielder back and start having that extra player in defense that you really need. Even from kickoff in the first game, you scored, but then from his first kickoff, I think about kind of 4 minutes in, you do a really good job of holding him on the wing, but you just stay controlling 𝘬𝘃𝗀𝗰𝘀𝘀 at right back. And because you never bring anybody in, it's just you 1v1, and he's got enough space and time that he's able to then get past you, and you get a little bit lucky to win the ball back, and then pass the ball out in a way that I think is another thing I'd kind of like to talk about defensively. But I know you mentioned that you don't like switching. Have you tried to right stick switch? Is it something that you've given much time to?
I mean, I try to use it. I guess I just never know where it's going. So I can't use it comfortably, because sometimes I feel like, all right, I want the player that is just in front of the ball. Let me move my right stick in that direction. Oh, it selected the player behind the ball. So I never know if it's supposed to be relative to where the ball is, or is it supposed to be relative to who I have currently selected? And I've just never, I guess I probably should just go to like squad battles and just do nothing but right stick switch and try and figure out where it's switching to. But I can never I feel like I never consistently end up with the player I want when I go with right stick switching. Although, to be fair, I never end up with the player I consistently want when I just use the bumper either. So I've tried to use more right stick, but once it's like anything else, when you're in the heat of the moment and you're starting to panic, right? You go to what you're most comfortable to, and that's just, so I end up using the bumper. And I think it's until I get that right stick really like ingrained in my head and comfortable with it, it's just not something, when, especially like I said, like once I start losing, right, I think it all goes out the window, right? And I'm probably holding down both the bumpers and the sprint button and everything, the whole game. So, but it's something I've definitely tried. It's just I don't feel like I have the consistency to use it, in the heat of the moment, and like think, oh, make sure you're doing this. Like, it's not second instinct, or first instinct.
Yeah. It's interesting because like all of those things, and that thing that you said about panicking when you're behind is really noticeable just in how much you jockey. You, like, when you were winning and comfortable, you were jockeying quite a lot defensively, happy to just cut the passing lane or not really dive in too much. But when it was a game where it felt a bit tighter, you tended to just you erred on the side of tackling in the full sprint rather than like jockeying to try and wait for the mistake. Like, and in terms of a video, if you want like an example of all of these things together, about 22 minutes into the first game, in fact, it's one of the only situations in which I saw you right stick switch, and you right stick switch from the centre back to your left winger. So maybe it is like, it definitely is something that I would look at in terms of whether the switching is relative to the player or to the ball. That'll be in your settings. If you haven't changed it, it will be player relative. So whoever you've got selected, it will go off the direction from them. So, and you can have like a sensitivity on it. So if you're kind of switching quickly, just little flicks will go shorter distances, and holding it longer will go further distances, so you can switch further away. I think it's better to have it so that it's a lot more difficult to switch really far away from one player initially, because otherwise you can end up in situations where you're controlling somebody you don't want to. But that example at 22 minutes into the first game is also where you second man press in a situation where it pulls the centre back and then you can never get back. Whereas if you were able to grab a midfielder earlier and bring them back in, it becomes 3-on-3 on that side of the pitch rather than the 3-on-2 that ends up leading to you conceding.
Yeah, I mean, something I did want to point out about right stick switching, you mentioned the right stick switching or switching sensitivity, Josh. I think that is something I'd really encourage people who aren't right stick switching to go in and just turn that down to basically nothing. You'll find it way, way easier to switch. You have to flick it twice basically to go to players further away, but it's way more consistent in terms of I think where you think you're probably going to switch to being the place you're going to switch to when you flick that right stick. And it helped my player switching massively when I tried that. And you'll start right stick switching in situations where you would have LB switched because you feel more confident in that, I think, at that point than with L1, LB. I think we should actually take a break there, but we've got more to talk about on the defensive front. So we'll do that just after this break. Hello, welcome back after the break. Right, let's keep digging into the defensive side of the game. Josh, I know you had a few more things to add defensively.
Yeah, so it's more about like thoughts whilst defending. One of the things you said was that you can panic at times in defense, and I think that's because there's the mentality of like, I have to get the ball back immediately. And there are some situations in which that's absolutely fine to do, especially when someone's passing into pressure, passing into a striker where you've got a centre-back right near them. You can be a bit more aggressive, especially higher up the pitch. You do it really well with midfielders. But there are certain situations, especially when you're being countered, where delaying is more important than winning the ball back. I don't know what your exact tactic is, but I would guess that 𝘂𝘁𝗄𝗯 is on wing back something, just because of where she positions herself on the pitch. And one of the things when we get into how you play with the ball, I would be using her a lot more than you actually do. But there's a point in the final game about 35 minutes in where you lose the ball and there's a counter, and because she's up the pitch, your opponent plays a pass out to the right wing. And so you bring a centre back over there to kind of cover. But instead of going over and kind of trying to cover the line, but also make sure that you could still get to the reverse pass into the middle, you just go straight out to the winger, slide in to try and take them out. And so he plays one pass inside, and now you're 3-on-2, and he just plays one ball through because you then panic and go and put pressure on the player, and he gets an easy through ball and goal. Whereas if you'd have just held, actually, if you look, he plays the pass inside, and because of the delay, because of the slowdown of the player he's passing with, 𝘂𝘁𝗄𝗯 actually is back in the defensive line by the time he plays the next pass. So if you'd have just kind of held with the centre-back and delayed the decision-making for him, not overcommitted, you'd have got back into 4 defenders and might have been able to then stop the counter. It's something you do really well about 7 minutes later, about 42 minutes into the game, where he has a good counter, and it's a very similar situation where 𝘂𝘁𝗄𝗯's caught up the pitch, he plays the ball down the right wing, but because you don't really overcommit and you bring the midfielder back as well, it just slows him on that right wing and means that you then get your entire shape back and you go in and win the ball then very well with Zidane. So it's just more about those thoughts when somebody's on the ball about delaying. The last thing I'd say defensively, and it'll kind of bring us on nicely to when you're on the ball, is when you win the ball defensively, there's a bit of panic in terms of how to release it. There's quite a few times where you'll try and ping a ball out of defense through an attacking line or just straight forward. It kind of feeds into, I think, a way that you play quite a lot, which is kind of get the ball forward as quickly as possible. And sometimes if you just had a bit more happiness to even pass it back to the goalkeeper at times, I think you would lose the ball a lot less in defense when you've won it quite well. It's just then the opposition's team will back off. They tend not to immediately put pressure on unless they've kind of gone to a very attacking depth, and they're trying to do that. But you have a lot more time defensively because you've always got the ability to turn back towards your own goal, pass it back to the keeper, clear it if you want. Whereas there's quite a few times where that feels like I just need to get this ball forward. And again, in games where you're comfortable, in games where you're the better player, you can get away with it. But in games that are tight, it might be that situation where you lose the ball and give a goal away that can change the outcome of the game. So I don't know if that's something you're conscious of when you win it defensively. Is that something you feel like you lose the ball a lot when you win it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the last 2 points you brought up, if I had to name the 3, defensively, the 3 things I'm bad, one-on-one defending, or even when the player gets out on the wing, and they're one-on-one with my fullback, I mean, basically anybody can get around me. I give up a lot of goals off of kickoff where someone just technical dribbles straight at me because I just don't know what to do. I can't tackle them. They just kind of dribble around me. And it's kind of funny because I kind of feel like the things I'm bad at defending are mirror the things I'm awful at. I think I'm awful on the ball and I can't dribble around anybody, but everyone can dribble around me. So it's one of my big frustrations. The second thing, I give up way too many goals on the counter, and not even just necessarily because 𝘂𝘁𝗄𝗯 gets caught up the pitch and I give up I move stuff around, but that ball between the 2 center backs, I feel like there was a game I played last night that wasn't one I recorded, and I think I gave up. I lost 5-4. I was up 4-1, and I gave up 4 goals, and I think all of them were either the guy technical dribbled off kickoff and scored, or was that ball through between. But yeah, once I get the ball and trying to get it out, I always feel like I get frustrated and I'm like, what? All the passing lanes are always covered. They're always covered. And so I never know what to do because I think part of it stems from the fact that I'm not comfortable on the ball. So I just like want to get rid of the ball as quickly as possible because I don't want to lose it with the center back. And so what I end up doing is I end up losing it because I end up passing it too quickly. So it's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts sometimes when it comes to that. I might win the ball with, John Stones, and I'm like, all right, I want to get rid of this because I don't want John Stones with the ball because I can't dribble, let alone with John Stones. And here come two guys running at me. It's like, what do I do? Yeah, it's definitely something I notice I do a lot. I mean, even off of goal kicks, the goal kick goals I give up sometimes, like because I just nonchalantly pass it to my defender and then I panic because there's a guy right on top of me and I end up passing it right to their midfielder and they score off of that. So it's definitely they're definitely huge holes, and like honestly, like part of me is like I don't know. I don't even know how to fix it because it's like I don't want to hold the ball with my center back, so I don't know what to do there.
Yeah, I mean, like there are a few times where you loft the ball into midfield, and especially because you're using Zidane as one of those midfield spots, you have the ability to do that. But often just passing it back to the keeper, you've got at least an extra 2 men in your defensive line at that point if the keeper's on the ball. If they're trying to put pressure on the keeper, you've got more time. It's always worth utilizing that extra player in defense. Sometimes a good old circle's okay. Like you've got a big man up front in Henry. He's going to win things in the air if the ball's there for him. So it's better than losing the ball if you feel under a lot of pressure defensively. I'm glad you brought up kickoffs though, because it's like one of my final points. Because you're playing the 4-on-4-1, your midfield pushes up from kickoff, which is kind of a normal thing, but it means if you don't make the tackle with Neves, who's the person you tend to go and try and make that tackle with. No, it's not Neves, sorry, it's 𝗵𝗃, isn't it? They're then into your back line. But one of the things you tend to do is like grab Henry and run at the player who's receiving the ball, and then they end up like dribbling forward, so then you're behind them and you don't switch quick enough into like a midfielder to stop them from just kind of running away from you. And that's something that happens quite a lot throughout the game, is that you tend to attack where somebody is rather than where they're going to be. And I just think if you thought a little more about blocking a progress up the pitch rather than going to where they are right now, especially when you're having to close some distance, I think it would help you feel a little more solid defensively, because you'd be slowing, again, it's that thing of slowing people down, of making them turn. If they are going to go forward, they're going to go into the path that you're cutting off. Like I even sometimes will take a striker and run them to the right side of the center circle, like so that I'm between the player and the goal, because they can just like run straight through you sometimes. I don't mind it if they pass it out to the wing, because again, I can delay them out on the wing. I can bring extra help in. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up kickoffs, because I was going to ask, do you concede a lot of goals from kickoffs? It was one of the things I'd written down.
Yeah, no, and honestly, a lot of this stems from like I think about like how I lose the ball, and like I said, maybe I'm going too far the other way. I feel like I lose the ball to players backtracking so much that I just assume, okay, well, I need to control the guy behind and just run back and catch up. And then I realize they catch up to me, but I don't catch up to them. So there's definitely a difference, right? It's not because, I mean, my players are worse. It's not because, it's something else. And I think you're right. It's like, it's because they do something in front of me that makes me delay slightly. That gives the time for the backtracker to get on top of me, as opposed to me where I think, well, I just got to backtrack because that's how people always win the ball off of me.
I know you were mentioning about when you had it at the back. I think the team you just sent through, Gareth Bale was in the squad, if I'm correct.
I was using Henry in the video, but I have Bale now.
Okay. I personally, if you are really struggling when you're at the back trying to get out of transition, or when you get it with the goalkeeper, put Bale at right mid. He's the best player you've got in that team, and just hit him on everything. If you've got it with the centre-back, square it out to Bale. No left-back on the game will beat him in the air, and it just gives you an out ball every single time. I think it's I do it very similar with, I've got Harry Kane, I play him as false 9. He'll drop into that little bit of space just in front of the centre-back. All you need to do is just play like 3 bars of a square into him, whoever that player is. If you hold L2 when you receive it, Bale will sort of back into the left back. You'll be able to take the ball down and you'll be able to get out of any sort of like transitional pressure. And also when you do get with the goalkeeper, if that's not on, just a full R1 square up the pitch, full manual clearance, there's a good chance that the centre-backs on the other side will not react to it that well. And if you've got a lot of pace up top and players who can also win the ball aerially, they'll be able to nod it down and you'll be able to get out that way. But I think for a lot of people, having the composure and playing out the back, it's not something that comes very naturally. And utilise what you've got in the team. You've got a 6'1", 6'2", very, very good aerial player in that squad who can help you out, and it just alleviates the pressure if you are losing the ball with the centre backs or trying to play into midfield. There's nothing wrong with just taking that out and going more direct.
Yeah, I think your point, Richard, about playing it back to the keeper and then having an out ball if you need to is a really good one, because people often panic when they get the ball with their keeper. So if there is that easy option out, that's going to help a lot. We've sort of started to talk about the attacking side of the game, I guess. So let's do that in more depth right after this break. Hello, listeners. A big announcement. There's a 36,000 𝘵ci point giveaway going on the Patreon right now. So if you'd considered supporting before, but perhaps hadn't, it's a great time to join up because there are really good odds of winning that. It's just £3 a month to support, and you do get an extra podcast every single week, as I say. And at the gold or icon tiers, there's access to the Discord too, where there's loads of great resources and a fantastic community. So if you're interested in any of that, then you can just head over and search support for weekly, or follow the link in the description of this podcast. A huge thank you if you do consider doing so, because it really helps the podcast out and it keeps Foot Weekly, in fact, twice weekly for supporters. Right, let's jump back into this week's podcast. Hello, welcome back after the break. Right, Cherry, you've already mentioned that you think one of your weaknesses is sort of dribbling, or I guess, is it composure on the ball maybe, would you say, in terms of attacking?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even ball roll consistently. So, I mean, the right stick basically doesn't exist for me for the most part. You know, and left stick dribbling is just not something I'm super comfortable with either. So I feel like I rely more on passing to kind of create chances versus, you know, trying to dribble.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are things that stood out to me in the attacking sense that were most noticeable in that final game. In the first 2 games, the opponents commit players forward. They were sometimes aggressive in the wrong areas, and that meant that you could counter pretty easily, and you did a good job of that. But when you faced the final opponent who kept more players back and was also very disciplined defensively, you really struggled. And also I then sensed that there was almost a bit of panic in the final third when faced with a more set defense. And there are 2 things to think about here. One is you shouldn't feel like that, because actually your opponent should be the one that feels sort of panicked by you being in their final third. And I think probably the thing that will help is just committing to improving your dribbling so that you feel like you can hold the ball and kind of bring someone out towards you and then move the ball on, rather than just, you know, playing passes for the sake of passes. The other thing I think is that actually, although I think you want to play a passing style and your tactics suggest that, the gameplay was kind of giving me flashbacks to playing in NA, where the game is a lot more direct. And actually, I think you're going to need to choose between sticking to the counter-attacking style and maybe adopting a more counter-attacking tactic, or going down the route of being more possession-based, improving your ability to unpick a defense once it's set, and continuing to play a more possession-based tactic like you're playing, if that makes sense.
I think you mentioned something about NA when you used to play over here for that year or so you were over here. And it's funny because I never think of myself as playing counterattacking or direct because everyone plays much more direct than I do in NA. So like to me, I'm thinking I'm playing like possession, right? Because everybody's route one, right? Everyone's playing that ball to the striker and just going. And I've tried to, and maybe the games I uploaded aren't great examples, but I've tried to do more of the, maybe play up to the striker, but then ping it right back out and maybe try and do a 1-2 to make him run in behind and then either try and play it back in or just try and take that space. I'm not super comfortable, like I said, with dribbling, with the center mids up, up into that space. But, like if I were to pull up my like scoring stats, like 𝗏𝗏 probably has maybe scores a goal every like 15 games, 10, if that, and she's on playmaker, attack, and center mid, right? She should be probably scoring goals, but I mean, like I said, most of my stuff comes from the outside. The outside's kind of cutting in and shooting finesses, but yeah, no. Once I always feel like I don't use the wings enough, and I don't use that space out there because I feel like I'm constantly trying to cut in, and I feel like sometimes people pick up on it very quickly, and they just start knowing it's like he's cutting inside, right? And unfortunately, I'm not that Dutch fraud or Salah or whatever, right? And I can't just cut inside. Everyone knows I'm going to cut inside and still score. So I think that ends up being a problem because it's basically the only thing I feel like I can score with consistently. And so sometimes I get down there and I'm just panicking because I'm like, all right, I want to cut inside or I want to do this, but it's like he's defending it. That's all he's doing. So yeah, there's definitely panic. Maybe that's the theme of my gameplay is just panic.
Yeah, I actually completely disagree. I don't think you are panicking in the final third. You're just not seeing what's on. In the gameplay you provided us, 25:57 time-ish on the game. You win the ball back. You counter really well. You play down the right-hand side. And if you stop it at like minute 26, there's an extra pass onto the edge of the box. But when you get into the final third, you're very... Because you imagine you're a barista and you're great at making Americanas. You're fantastic. But as soon as someone says, yeah, the coffee machine's broken, you can't do anything else. You get into that position, and as soon as you get with Henry, you think, finesse, shoot. If you would have just turned back onto the left, you've got a 99 shooting Zidane there who's approaching the edge of the box with a free shot. There's 3 or 4 occasions in the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of the game where I think when you are attacking, and as soon as you get onto the edge of the box, you just think, I've got to hit the finesse. And if you just play that extra pass, you score. And I don't think that's panicky. I think you're not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, it might not be panic. It might just be that like you have an idea in your head that you're struggling to like get out. So when you receive the ball on the edge of the box, it's like, this is my finesse position
100%.
Rather than... Is the finesse on? Or just a few minutes later in the game, 8 minutes 40 in the game, 26:40 in the video, you play a pass to the edge of the box and it's the most open first time pass into Henry, who would just be in one-on-one. But instead you take a touch and try and finesse it because you've got a finesse player on the edge of the box. And I don't think it's, I would kind of err on the side of Richard. I don't think it's panic. I think it's more you have this is how I score in your head. Like you said at the beginning, 85% of your shots you score are finesse shots, but it wouldn't need to be that many if you stopped thinking I can only score with finesse shots.
I would just push back on this idea just quickly that it isn't panic, and panic is just a word. What we're really getting at here is kind of a lack of confidence and feeling kind of rushed or wanting to go down the same familiar route you always take, or missing a pass because you're too concerned that you might lose the ball. That's what I'm talking about here. And I don't think it would necessarily affect us, as in the 3 of us as experienced players who are fairly actually composed, I think, on the ball. But I see it all the time in gameplay clips, in opponents I'll sometimes play, that is really affecting their ability to make the right decision. And I think it is important to highlight that. In terms of what you can do to prevent that being an issue is just sort of pre-scanning. And when the ball is traveling to your player's feet, that is your moment to think, where is my next pass? What's my next move? So you can get ahead a bit, because I feel like a lot of the time people kind of think, okay, I've got the ball with this player, now what do I do? But you really do need to be a step or two ahead if you want to kind of take your game to the next level. So next time you're kind of receiving a pass into the final third, before that pass comes to you, just start thinking about, okay, where's my next pass? Or where's my next bit of space to dribble into? Rather than being like, okay, I've got the ball with this player, I'm going to do this thing that I often do. What can I do next? Which is, I guess, a bit different as well, and makes the opponent think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two sides of the same coin, right? Is like I feel like there aren't options, and so that's where the panic comes from. Richard's kind of saying there are options, you just don't see them. You know, I haven't gone back, and I remember, you know, we have that great channel that you guys posted for the clips for analysis. I know there was a couple months back I posted, and you know, Josh had replied. He's like, "Do you not see?" I think it was Rolfo. It's like, Rolfo, like, why do you have that player on the pitch if you're not going to pass to them? Like, they are literally wide open. And it's like, I go back and I look at it and I'm like, wow, she was so wide open. Why did I not pass it back to her? And, you know, I think not seeing that in the moment, right? It like you said, like when I constantly feel like all my players are marked, right? And I'm like, and the thing I want to do absolutely least is be one-on-one and try and dribble around somebody, because I don't know what to do. Like Josh says, I rely a lot on trying to do the sprint boost or sprint touch, you know, with the first time with Henry, and I still can't do it. I don't do it at the right times. It doesn't work well. And then when I'm out on the wings, you know, it's even worse. Because I don't really have super strong dribblers out on the wings. So yeah, I definitely think it's just not seeing it in the moment and just feeling like I never have options.
Yeah, on that topic, actually, there are two things that I think will help in terms of feeling like you have a bit more control when you're actually dribbling with the ball. And have you used controlled sprint or technical much at all?
I probably hold that button down probably too much. I use that all the time, yeah.
I noticed it when you brought Musiala off the bench, because that's all you ever did with him.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess I noticed that the situations where I often use it is actually to maintain separation from the defender and not necessarily to beat them always, if that makes sense. Because if you do a regular dribble, it's not as fast, right? So it does give the defender a bit of a chance to get closer to you and put more pressure on. But I'll use it even with players who don't have technical or technical plus, just to keep myself at a distance and create a bit more of an angle to make the next pass, if that makes sense. So I'm using it quite immediately, basically, after receiving the ball. And I think that would probably help you. If you receive the ball with the player, the first thing you could do, I don't think you did this either, is do the sort of first touch that you can do, which is holding R1/RB and then flicking the right stick into space. Tends to work pretty well to give yourself a bit more time on the ball. And I should say, someone asked actually recently, you want to do that sort of at the same time, the RB or R1 and right stick flick, as the ball comes into you. And there was one touch you did, which I think was actually a sprint touch, but you can do this more consistently with the mechanic that I'm talking about, where you did this really nice flick away from Henry into space. And then, you know, that opened up some really nice build-up, actually. So what you can try and do is implement that just to give yourself a bit more separation from the defender. But also, if you're going to receive it without doing the first touch, I think controlled sprint is really nice for just, you know, maintaining that distance and then moving the ball on. Because the way that you pass, once you've got a bit of space, you should generally be able to kind of recycle the ball in a way that's going to be threatening. And you do see passes. I know you're saying you miss passes here and there, but you do tend to see passes, and you will be able to do nice passing moves that open up space as long as you feel comfortable enough on the ball to see those options, basically. So I think you're right. The more comfortable you get at dribbling the ball, the better you'll be able to kind of help your passing game and progress the ball in the final third, not just in the middle of the pitch, I guess. Is there anything else attacking-wise people wanted to add?
It's interesting you say about sort of space on the ball, and I'm going to reference back to the gameplay. I think it's like 30 minutes, 10 seconds. You cut open the defence, you're just past the halfway line, and you have got the entire pitch really on the far left-hand side to run with 𝘵𝘃𝗁𝗆. I play a lot of pro clubs with people. I play a lot of who aren't super comfortable on the ball. And the one thing I say to people when they got that space is take your space, take the space and commit that defender over to you. I think because you don't feel super confident with the ball, this clip, how it unfolds, you get the ball with 𝘂𝘁 and you play a first-time pass straight away. And if that's me and I get the ball there, I'm sprinting full pelt. I've got one of the best left-backs on the game at my opponent and trying to commit him to switch onto his centre-back to pull over to me. What he actually does is run back, I think it's with 𝘭̀r𝘬𝘬 at right back and wins the ball back and then goes down the other end and concede. It just, when you have those opportunities where you see, if you can sort of scan the pitch and you see that your opponent's pulled their right back out of position and you've got the space to go in behind, especially on that left back position with 𝘂𝘁, take that space. All you really need to do, as soon as she gets it, just hold R2 and just sprint in a straight line for 10, 15 yards and make your opponent commit to tackling you rather than allowing him to pull his midfield back and congest you out. Because when you actually play the pass into Son, you've got nothing to pass to. Like because the team's in transition, Zidane's way out of the picture, Henry's way out of the picture. And I think you get the ball into Henry, you get tackled, and then 𝘂𝘁's up by the corner flag. It just sort of unravels very quickly. But you don't concede that goal. Even if 𝘂𝘁 runs down the line and you get a corner, you've created an attacking element of the game. I
agree with that. And also, I did want to highlight Richard's point. That's definitely something I was going to say. I can't remember who said this to me once, but it was playing football itself in real life is eat the space. And so whenever there is space there, you should eat it up. And it seems counterintuitive in some situations because it can mean you're actually not going towards the goal. And for some people that, even if there is a bit of some space towards the goal, going into more open space that isn't so directly at goal doesn't feel logical, but actually it is so important for sort of shifting players out of position. And I think eat the space and also find the tools to feel more composed on the ball when you're dribbling. And I think you'll find then the passes that are there that maybe you're not seeing. And yeah, are there any questions actually, I guess, because we're pretty close to wrapping up, but from what we've kind of said so far, whether it's like specifics about techniques or just questions about anything we've said so far?
No, I know you guys kind of brought up some of the stuff with tactics, and I've been going back and forth between whether I stick with what I have or move to something with wingers. The reason I haven't really gone to, like, I know who is messing around with like a 4-3-3, similar to what I was using, because I'm actually using the tactic that he based his, I think, 4-3-3 defensive off of, which is one that Team Hullet posted, the 4-1-4-1. But like I've stayed away from using wingers just because of how far up the pitch they end up, versus being able to have the left and right mids kind of sit back. Do you think that maybe switching to something, because of the way that I'm kind of getting the ball out quicker, it'd be better to have something with wingers versus just the left and right mids?
It's an interesting one because these conversations often do depend on the personnel you have in your team as well, in terms of role pluses and plus pluses, because they're obviously quite important at the moment. I think you could continue to play what you're playing. Like we talked about it before. I think it will give you a kind of higher level of challenge in terms of being effective in the game, but it will, I guess, mean that you play better or should play better. But I think if you were to do that, you kind of have to promise yourself you're going to stay true to that style and be more willing to, be composed in the final third, to work the ball around and accept that you can't be as direct as perhaps your instinct would suggest, I guess. Because the alternative, is to play something maybe with a cam behind a striker, whether you have left wing and right wing or left mid or right mid. I think having two up front or a cam behind a striker is probably the biggest advantage for counter-attacking versus, playing that midfield three as you are currently. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
No, I think that's okay for me, what you said there.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's good, because we need to wrap up. But I did want to say, actually, before we do, we go through a lot of kind of negatives about the gameplay in these sessions, But I think it's also important to highlight that you do quite a number of things really quite well, especially for someone who has only really committed to the game in the last 2 years. Some of the bits of build-up, the patterns of play, and actually your shooting on precision is pretty impressive at times, very impressive at times, and shows certainly a good level of skill. And also the other thing is, I guess, that you are defending in a way that is relatively advanced or has a high ceiling because you're willing to be aggressive, and you do that quite well at times. So I thought I'd get in a few bits of positivity at the end here, and we'll come back for next week's gameplay episode, which will be a supporter episode, to check in again, see how you've done implementing these things, maybe look at some more gameplay that you've recorded more recently after this session, and give some further advice. So yeah, supporters can catch that in their supporter feeds. And of course, if you're a listener and would like to become a supporter, then you can do so. Great time to do so because of that giveaway as well. Just search support for weekly. So yeah, thank you very much, Cherry, for joining us and sharing in this episode.
Yeah, I'm excited to get in and try and implement some of the things you guys talked about, and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much as well to our advisors here. Thank you very much, Richard Buckley. Good to have you on.
Thank you very much, as always. I apologise if it came across aggressive. But
it's the Neil Warnock approach.
It's all in love.
Yeah.
It is.
Where was the time wasting advice?
Be disciplined.
Have the arm around the shoulder after the podcast, I'm sure.
You will be my adult rat.
And Josh as well. Thank you very much for your advice on this podcast as well.
I always enjoy these episodes. I'm sure at some point we'll do one for our gameplay and get absolutely rinsed.
Yeah, I feel like we deserve it at this point. But yeah, that is it. And thank you very much. We should say, Cherry, for being an icon supporter of the podcast as well. As you know, that is a big part of how the podcast keeps going, and it's been great to analyze icon gameplay on these special episodes. And if you would like to volunteer, then you can get in touch. The best way to do that is via Discord. Thank you very much, of course, to all you listeners tuning in, listening to this podcast. And if you are listening to it via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, then do subscribe. If you're catching on YouTube, then do drop a comment, leave a like, let us know what you thought of this format. And finally, thank you very much to all you supporters supporting the podcast, keeping it going, including those icon patrons. Dave B, Hugh J, Jeff B, Darren W, Warren A, Stephen M, Waterman, Dan W, Roger D, Rob P, Lee A, Dom P, L M, Damon H, The Shirt Locker, Alex M, Tom B, Jake S, Neil P, Michael K, David G, Andrew R, Michael H, Jimmy K, Brendan T, 𝗵𝘀𝗀𝗃, Michael B, Brian V, Josh R, Brent P, Rob W, and Juicy. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.